This lesson provides an overview of the types of remote access and why it's important. If we consider a typical office user, they're at a corporate location, their machines are connected via an Ethernet cable or maybe a wireless network, they're inside the corporate intranet. They can access all the corporate resources, the servers, the file shares, the printers, and they may also be able to access the internet if that connectivity is provided. But we really live in a far more mobile environment today. Users work from home, users work while on the road, users can work while on a plane at 30,000 feet. And so we have to think about enabling connectivity to corporate resources even when users aren't on corporate premises. Now, some services just work even when users aren't on the corporate network. If you look at things like email access from Exchange Server, that supports ActiveSync. It allows users to essentially connect using the HTTPS protocol, which ActiveSync is tunneling inside, and gives them access to their Exchange server so they can read their email. Services such as Remote Desktop Gateway enable remote desktop connections outside of the corporate network by tunneling the RDP packets to Remote Desktop Protocol inside HTTPS packets as well. Some SharePoint services, web services, you can enable through HTTPS. So there are ways to make some types of resource available. But what about the other types of resource? And this is where we need that ability to essentially put users on our corporate network, even when they're not physically there. I am working at home. And remote access provides this capability. I look back on my first job when I was 18, and typically in those days, going back quite a long time, you would work on the office. But I was a VAX VMS systems administrator, and there were times where I had to kick off jobs that might take 8 hours, and these had to be done at the weekend. And I didn't want to have to come into the office for that. So I actually set up a modem at my desk connected to my line, and I could dial into my desk computer essentially, and then run commands from there. Now, as I look back, that was highly insecure and I should not have done that. But what I was really doing was enabling a remote access service. From my house, I could dial into my line at work and then access that computer and therefore access the rest of the network. So that's really a type of dialing connection. And companies offered that as an official type service. They had banks of modems and users could dial in from them from home using their modems and connect to the corporate office. Now, as internet connectivity became more popular at home, you didn't have that modem anymore. You just had an internet connection. And so instead of making a dedicated phone call to the corporate office, you created a connection to the corporate network, a virtual private network. And what a virtual private network basically does is it creates a tunnel from your machine at home to the corporate network. And this then lets you access those corporate resources as if you were there. And that tunnel provides a number of different capabilities. But first I want to clarify two things: the difference between authentication and authorization. So authentication is really verifying who you are. It verifies your credentials. So you are who you say you are. Authorization is saying, well, now I know who you are. Are you allowed to perform these certain types of action? So authentication may prove, yes, you're John Saville. Authorization would say, well, you, John Saville, are allowed to remotely connect to this network. And authentication is a key part of a virtual private network because you have to prove, well, are you allowed to connect and are you really who you say you are? And there are a number of different types of authentication available. Now, the very earliest type of this was really plain text type passwords, PAP. And this is terrible. I mean, essentially, you're sending a plain text password over the network and it's highly insecure. There's no mutual authentication. And so really the only time you would want to use PAP, the password authentication protocol, is if you had the oldest possible client that didn't support anything better. And really, you should not see that today. So we build on top of PAP and we get to CHAP, the Challenge Handshake Authentication Protocol. Now, this is a challenge response protocol. It's using some standard MD5 hashing, but this is still using a reversible encryption of your password. So it's still a security risk there that someone could perform a brute force attack and try and work out what your password is. There's also no mutual authentication. So mutual authentication is saying the client wants you as the server to prove who you are, and at the same time the server wants the client to prove who they are. This avoids some other server pretending it's offering this remote service. And likewise, a client can't pretend there's someone else. CHAP does not support that. So then we have MS Chat v2. So this is a new capability that Microsoft added, and it uses a one-way encrypted password, and it uses mutual authentication. So this is much better than CHAP, and certainly if you can use this, you want to do it. There is also a fourth type, Extensible Authentication Protocol, EAP. Now this is the most flexible. You can add in different arbitrary types of authentication into this. So it's the most secure and the most flexible. So if your clients support EAP, you have this in your network, you'd certainly want to use EAP. So there are types of authentication. Then we have different types of VPN. I've already talked about the remote access. This is the single user at their home, out buying coffee, doesn't matter. They want to connect a single machine into the corporate network, providing them a remote access capability. Then VPNs can also be used for site-to-site. So imagine the scenario where you have 3 or 4 offices and you don't have dedicated links between the buildings, which is what some organizations will do. They actually have dedicated connections, dedicated wires, or maybe satellite technologies between the offices so it appears as one network. But maybe you don't have that infrastructure. Maybe they're too geographically distributed, and instead you want to connect them over the internet. So each office has a connection to the internet, and then using that internet connection, you want to create a virtual pipe between the different offices. So you can use that site-to-site VPN technology so it creates that encrypted secure tunnel between each office, allowing that inter-office communication to take place without any risk of security. And they are the 2 main types of VPN we're going to see. A computer to the network, remote access for users, and then site-to-site. So this concludes the lesson on the overview of types of remote access technology and really why it's important.